Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another new edition of Africa Today, where we get you the latest news and events taking place on the African scene. And we will start off with our major top stories and reports. Libyan lawmakers concluded on Saturday a series of meetings in Cairo aimed at forming a liaison committee to work with the United Nations mission in Libya to form a national unity government. Earlier, the Libyan National Army announced a sudden advance in the battle to seize control of the capital, Tripoli. We have more details in the following report.
Forces of the Libyan National Army said that they launched airstrikes on military sites in Misrata. The city of Misrata is 200 kilometers east of the Libyan capital and the source of the main armed groups. The LNA spokesman Ahmed El-Mismari said on Facebook that air forces hit facilities in Misrata that militants and terrorist groups are using to stock Turkish anti-craft equipment and weapons. He added that the strikes triggered a series of major explosions when rockets and munitions were hit. Videos circulated on social media appeared to show a surface-to-air missile hitting an aircraft over Misrata. The Libyan National Army launched an operation on April the 4th to take the capital. Ankara, which is increasingly open about its support of the terrorists and militants, have equipped them with Turkish Bayraktar drones.
Welcome back. And despite producing more food than it can consume, humanity risks a menacing mix of food crisis brought on by social inequalities, environmental degradation, climate change and wars. A UN report warned on Friday. We have more details in this report.
A UN report warned that despite producing more food than it can consume, humanity risks a menacing mix of food crises brought on by social inequalities, environmental degradation, climate change, and wars. After decades of steady decline, the number of people who suffer from hunger worldwide has been slowly increasing since 2015. Last year, more than 820 million people went hungry. A key obstacle is unequal access. While some people throw away food they buy too much of, others cannot afford or find the nutrition they need. There was also the question of quality, with too many people relying on calories from fat and sugar, which are poor in vitamins and minerals. The global population will expand from 7.7 billion in 2019 to 8.5 billion in 2030, mostly in already hungry Africa and Asia, piling pressure on limited available resources. Urban populations will grow by 50% by 2030, while rural ones by more than 20% in some countries. Migration fueled by conflicts and natural disasters, in turn worsened by global warming, will further worsen the situation. As more and more people are lifted out of poverty, there has been a higher demand for animal food products.
Welcome back, and moving on to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The World Health Organization announced that the ongoing Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo constitutes a public health emergency of international concern. We have the story.
The World Health Organization, the WHO, said at its emergency committee meeting that the deadly Ebola epidemic in the Democratic Republic of Congo remains an urgent global health emergency. DRC's latest Ebola epidemic, which began in August 2018, has killed 2,144 people, making it the second deadliest outbreak of the virus after the West Africa pandemic of 2014-2016. The status of a global health emergency is an exceptional measure that has been used by the WHO 4 times: in 2009 for the swine flu virus, in 2014 for polio, in 2014 for the Ebola epidemic, which killed more than 11,000 in Liberia, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and in 2016 for the Zika virus. Last week, the director of the WHO Emergency Program, Michael Ryan, expressed cautious optimism that the epidemic was confined to the smaller region. The DRC Health Ministry said earlier this week Ebola had returned to Ituri province in the northeast of the country after nearly 300 days without any new cases. Since the most recent Ebola outbreak, a vaccine developed by Merck, Sharp, and Domi has been used on more than 230,000 people. On Friday, the vaccine, which has yet to be licensed, received a green light from the European Medicines Agency in a step towards its commercializations.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And on our main topic for today, President Sisi sending an address to Russia-Africa Summit participants. We're joined over the phone by Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former assistant to the Foreign Minister. Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon, madam.
Ambassador Haridi, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi sent an address to the participants of the Russia-African Summit to be held in Russia's Sochi on October 23rd and 24th. How do you see the significance of this address? And of course, the address of President Sisi carries great significance as it's the first of its kind to emerge during a period of major global and international transformations, as comes in the President's words. How do you read this, and how do you see the significance of the message?
This is the first edition of what will be called the Russian-African Forum and Economic Cooperation Forum. Russia is a latecomer into this club of great powers who have decided to enter into partnership with Africa, like, for example, China, Japan, and India. And at Sochi in Russia, the Russian president, with the president of the African Union, the Egyptian president Sisi, would co-chair this first edition of the Russian-African Forum. According to the agenda prepared by the Russian side, the meeting or the forum will discuss many issues, such as the cooperation in the fields of investment, industrialization, the fight against terrorism, and there will be some agreement that will be signed between the African Union on the one hand and some economic organizations like the Economic Committee for the Eurasian Custom Union, plus an agreement that provides for a framework of cooperation among between the African Union and Russia. On top of that, there will be a meeting for African and Russian businessmen. And according to the organizers of the forum, around 3,000 businessmen from both sides will be attending. Russia has high hopes for the future in cooperating with the African continent. And of course, from an African perspective, such a forum should be welcomed. And definitely the Russians are interested and are eager at the same time to have access to Africa and for political and for strategic reasons. And we welcome the Russian overture towards Africa.
Right. Well, sir, do you agree that this summit will succeed in building a comprehensive framework of expanding Russian-African relations?
Well, as expected, this agreement between the African Union and Russia on the framework of cooperation between Russia and the African continent would go a long way towards strengthening cooperation between the two sides in various fields, like for instance, infrastructure, railway. These are things that are much needed in the African continent in order to boost economic development. Another topic that will be discussed is the higher education. Russian authorities are thinking of providing African students with scholarships to study in in the highest institute of learning in Russia in various fields, and this should be, and this is a welcome step on the part of Russia. And on the other hand, Russia is interested in sharing its technological advances with African countries. Let me add that last October there was an agreement signed between Egypt and Russia on a Russian industrial zone in the Suez Canal corridor, development corridor. And this project would be discussed within this first edition of the Russian African Forum. And this would be a good step in the right direction of how to use Egypt as a stepping stone, as a bridge to gain access to African markets.
Right. Well, sir, the African market is a promising market for Egyptian experts. To what extent are there investment opportunities for Egyptian companies in Africa?
Well, already there are some Egyptian investments in the African continent, mainly in Ethiopia, and plus that some leading Egyptian construction companies have already built buildings, official buildings, in some African countries. And as you may recall, Madam, the leading Egyptian construction company is actually building a dam, a big dam in East Africa, in Tanzania. So I guess and Egypt has a long history of investing in the African continent, and I guess we can build on this positive heritage and enriching heritage. And of course, we are cooperating on the bilateral level with African countries. We are cooperating with Africa through the various fora and various international partnerships that have been established between some great powers and Africa. I guess I feel very optimistic about the results of this Russian African Forum. I guess it's in the interest of African countries, including Egypt, to deepen cooperation with Russia as a way of reaching an equilibrium in African relations with great powers.
Right. Ambassador Haridi, in your opinion, how can we overcome the challenges facing Egypt's investments in Africa, and especially ensuring the safety of the funds invested there?
Well, I guess Africa does suffer from a certain image, but I think African governments and the African Union and the African Development Bank and various economic groupings within Africa are very aware of the challenges facing foreign investment. And I understand that there are very serious efforts by African governments and by the African Union to address these challenges, because everyone is certain that in order to attract direct foreign investment, foreign investors should be guaranteed and should be assured and should have the confidence that in case of any cases, judicial cases, there are courts that would rule on the economic differences, and that the structure, the legal structure and the investment structure are receptive and are welcoming to foreign investors. Of course, it would take, to gain the trust of the foreign investors is not an easy task, and it calls for efforts day in and day out to send a message home to everyone that Africa is a good destination for foreign investment. I have to say that, of course, the rate of economic growth in Africa has reached around 5% per annum. This is very encouraging, but we need to do more in order to keep pace with the population explosion in Africa. By the year 2050, the African population would reach around 1,300,000,000 people, and half of them, or more than half of this number of this population will be youth under 30 years old. That is to say that African governments from north to south, from east to west, should really work hard in order to provide employment opportunities for the rising generation on the African continent.
Right. Ambassador Haridi, how do you see the role of representative offices in promoting trade exchange between African countries and the establishment of sustainable exhibitions to market Egyptian products over there?
Well, of course, the trade missions are doing their best, but the main onus is on the Egyptian investors. In order to gain access to African markets, you have to enjoy a very good commercial and business reputation. And to gain a credible business reputation is a very hard task. It needs hard work, and it needs people well trained in communicating with the Africans, whether we are speaking about government officials or the private sector or the financial sector and services. So really, Africa, as you said, is a very promising market. But in order to gain a foothold for good in this market, Egyptian investors should work hard on gaining the trust of Africans.
Right. Mr. Ambassador, how can the opening of more Egyptian banks in African countries contribute to increasing trade between Egypt and African countries?
Well, I believe this is a political decision. Of course, I'm speaking about the public sector banks. The government should encourage the 4 public sector banks to begin with establishing rep offices, at least rep offices, as a first step in various leading African capitals. As you may know, Madam, Africa is divided into 5 geographic zones.
Yes.
And if we can establish a rep office or rep offices for the 4 banks in the leading capitals in these 5 geographical regions, then that would be a good step. Not only a good step, but it's very necessary to finance business deals between Egyptian companies and importers in various African countries. I personally believe that the government should be committed politically to this endeavor because it's a prerequisite for boosting trade relations, investment relations between Egypt and Africa.
Right. Well, finally, sir, before we wrap it up, to what extent does Egypt provide the necessary support to implement a number of infrastructure projects and achieve regional integration at the continent level?
Well, we have already, as earlier, Madam, some leading contracting companies are working or have been working and have met success in doing some very important infrastructure, in carrying out some important infrastructure projects, and there is an African program in the framework of the African Union to boost the development of infrastructure in Egypt. we in Egypt, we have an expertise in infrastructure. And I guess we are working on that. There is, just to give you an example, madam, there is this highway that would link Cairo in the north to Cape Town in the south, in South Africa. And really, I understand that the work is being carried out. And I guess this is a very ambitious project.
Definitely.
And just imagine a highway linking Cairo Cape Town. It's called the CC project. CC here stands for C for Cairo and C for Cape Town in the south. And really, I wish this dream would come true someday. Because that would boost trade relations and would encourage the movement of people across the African continent. One of the major obstacles towards economic integration in Africa is the absence of a reliable and effective infrastructure, road infrastructure. And when we speak about road infrastructure, also we speak about railways. We have to work on that. And of course, we have a great experience also in the field of railway construction. So I believe if there is a political will, if we commit ourselves to deepen our integration with Africa, I guess the sky is the limit.
Right. Well, I would like to thank you very much, Ambassador Hussein Haridi, former assistant to the Foreign Minister. And dear viewers, with this we come to the end of this edition of Africa Today. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned for more coming up here on Night TV International.